Hello and welcome. The theme of today's video is second chances because we're going to be covering a car from a brand that has kind of risen from the ashes of another. This is the Aito M5, and it is a result of a collaboration between Ceres, a Chinese car maker, and Huawei, one of China's largest and most well-known technology companies. This is not the first time these two companies have worked together, and the results of their first collaboration were less successful than they had hoped. Today, we're going to see if the M5 can do any better.
When the Aito M5's predecessor, the Ceres SF5, went on sale in 2019, it had nothing to do with Huawei. It wasn't until 2021 that Ceres and Huawei announced they would be introducing an updated version of the SF5 utilizing Huawei's Drive One drivetrain and suspension system and high-car infotainment system. The updated SF5 was briefly sold through some Huawei retail locations, but while it was met with a great deal of enthusiasm at its debut, delays in production and other complications meant sales didn't reach the lofty goals set by the two companies. With the all-new Aito brand, it appears Huawei had a much stronger hand in design and planning, with Ceres providing production capacity.
One of the big similarities between this and its predecessor, the SF5, is the exterior styling. Now, there's a lot of similarities, but also some major differences, I would say. The theme is the same, but the minutiae, the details, are different. Overall, I can't really find an angle on this car that I don't like. There are some echoes of other designs in it, for example, Aston Martin DBX in the front, Porsche Macan in the back, more than a little bit of that. But overall, it comes together to make a very attractive vehicle. Now, when you first see the name here, you might think it's pronounced Aito. I certainly did, but it is Aito. Now, what does AITO stand for? They were nice enough to include a little license plate cover that tells us, adding intelligence to auto. Now, does O start with A? No, but oh well, it comes together pretty well. Let's look at rear cargo space. Official numbers for rear space is 369 liters with the seats up. I believe 776 liters with the seats folded down. When it comes to the interior design language of the M5, it's erring on the simple, maybe even a little bit bland. It's very reminiscent of a Tesla, in my opinion, just kind of the simplicity of the overall look. Even this wood pattern here looks a little bit like a Tesla. Here in the center console, we have a, I think, actually very attractive kind of very one-piece looking design with this two cup holders here, one cup holder here, obviously your decent amount of space here in the cubby, and then right in front of your shifter, which, by the way, has a really good feel. Falls to hand very nicely. You have an Alcantara-lined Huawei Supercharge phone charger, a wireless charging pad, which apparently charges at 40 watts versus the 14 to 18 watts, if I recall correctly, that are available on most wireless charging pads. In terms of the material quality, well, I think that's also very similar to Tesla, both good and bad. That means that these leather here is acceptable, not rough or anything. There are, however, a couple of places that I must complain about. The first one being down here, behind the shifter, this kind of piano black plastic doesn't look very high quality to me, but really the worst part has to be up here, which is this plastic, which not only is it a very unattractive color, it just kind of looks like plastic that's aged into an ugly kind of faded, beige. And this action of this kind of camera covering thing also feels very cheap. So that's probably the only major weak point here on the interior. This car does come with some speakers embedded in the headrests, much like the Xpeng P7 that we reviewed, but the star of the interior, of course, is this, the 15.6-inch screen, and especially the Harmony OS. This is Huawei's brand new operating system for this vehicle, and I have to say, this is one of my favorite operating systems I've ever used in a vehicle. Now, this has a lot of really good features. One of my favorites is, for example, is the fact that you can choose different menus and apps to put here at the bottom of the screen, things you often use. For example, you could have your settings, you could have the Maps app, you could have the weather, and you can also delete those or add in other ones. It's very intuitive and very easy on the eyes. It's mostly just a picture up here with some menu buttons at the bottom. The built-in Maps app is Huawei's own. They call it Petal Maps, petal as in rose petal, flower petal, and it's actually very easy to use. I was using it today for the first time, and I found it very nice. The screen itself, high resolution, overall genuinely one of my favorite operating systems that I've ever used. But that's not surprising. This is Huawei we're talking about. They make operating systems for everything from computers to cell phones. It's not surprising, given their experience, that they would succeed, especially in this aspect. All right, the back seat of the M5. Now, this is a mid-size SUV, and back seat space does reflect that. I will note this seat is actually farther back than it normally would be, but still a very decent amount of space. 2 Type-C charging ports down here. I do notice, however, that the floor a little higher than I would like it. If you notice my knees, there's a fair distance between my legs and the seats here, which also could be a little bit longer. Overall, however, comfort is acceptable, and you have a really, really big sunroof here. Before we get into the driving portion, I'd love to give you a look at the engine, but, well,
the M5 is a range-extended electric vehicle, meaning it has a 1.5-liter turbo 4-cylinder that acts as a generator for the onboard electric motor, but does not power the wheels. There are 3 motor options available. The first is a single rear-mounted motor providing 200 kilowatts and 360 newton-meters of torque. That's 268 horsepower and 266 pound-feet. Mid-range models add a front-mounted motor for a total of 315 kilowatts and 720 newton-meters of torque, aka 422 horsepower and 532 pound-feet. Flagship models, like the one we drove in this video, get a combined 365 kilowatts and 675 newton-meters. That's 490 horsepower and 500 pound-feet. 0 to 100 km/h times are 7.1, 4.8, and 4.4 seconds, respectively.
Of course, what you're worried about when it comes to a hybrid, whether it's a range-extended EV like this one or a standard hybrid, is the integration of the electric motors and the internal combustion engine, that 1.5-liter turbo up front. I can say that the job they've done in this car is quite good. You do not hear this car very often, or rather, you don't hear the engine very often. The only time I noticed it was when we were stopped in a parking lot and the engine was still running when we were trying to run the air conditioning. That's about the only situation in which I felt like I could hear the engine. Regardless of the NVH, which is quite good, the acceleration is more than good. 4.4 seconds 0 to 100 is obviously very, very sufficient, and you get that real boost of the electric motors, that push off the line that you can't really get from a internal combustion engine. There is obviously, thanks to the great OS that I mentioned before, there's different driving profiles. I have an individual. I've, of course, selected from the 4 different acceleration modes: mild, standard, and intense. I've chosen the last one, hyper. I love the fact that they have a driving mode, acceleration mode called hyper, and it does feel quite hyper. This car is definitely fast enough. When it comes to the suspension, it's independent all around, and I have to say, this is one of the more composed vehicles that I've driven in a while. This is very comfortable both over the road and in corners. It's not a performance vehicle by any means, other than acceleration, and I have to say that we've been driving it mostly on straight back roads and highways, so I can't speak to the handling limits. I can say, however, that when going over speed bumps and all those things, it absorbs the impact very well. This is a very comfortable daily commuter car, no doubt. So I mentioned the NVH in this car is good, but the engineer from the company just mentioned something to me, which is this car has a exhaust kind of simulator mode, and including, they say, a mode that simulates shifts in this transmission, which it shouldn't actually do. I'm very curious to see how this feels. I'm told that I should notice it when I take off from a dead stop, which is what I'm about to do. Ready? Yeah, I don't know if you could hear it, but it simulated shifts. You can't feel them, obviously, but it definitely simulates the sound of a shift. You know, is it useful? No, but it's pretty fun. So I'm noticing it really does simulate a transmission. There's 3 different sounds, by the way. This is called move. And then there's thrust, which is kind of more bassy V8 noise. A little louder, too. And then there's tech, which is kind of your futuristic electric car noise. When you put it in thrust, one of the things that I notice is when it simulates a transmission, listen, when it downshifts, you can hear the RPMs jump a little bit. And when it upshifts, the RPMs go down. It's kind of fun. I got to admit, it's pretty fun. This car, of course, comes with the safety and driver assistance systems that you would expect. That includes adaptive cruise control and lane keep assist. The adaptive cruise control and lane keep assist systems are, I would say, about industry average, meaning they have a little bit of ping-ponging between the sides of the lanes, but nothing that's going to make you car sick or anything like that. They are definitely useful in traffic, which is really what these systems are ideal for. This thing shouldn't be driving for you constantly. You should just put on the adaptive cruise control, at least in my opinion, let it maintain the distance, and, well, you drive the car.
All versions come with a 40 kilowatt-hour battery pack that provides 150 kilometers of pure electric range on the WLTP standard. When combined with the range-extending engine up front, it has a claimed WLTC range of over 1,100 kilometers.
So returning to that question from the intro of this video, does this car do a better job than the first effort, the SF5? The honest answer, I think, is yes. Despite costing considerably more than that car, I think it offers a better value. Does that mean that it's going to sell? Well, I don't know. If I did, I wouldn't be a broke YouTuber. I would be an automotive executive. But I will say, I think that it should. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Links in the description. And as always, like, subscribe, and hit the bell.